Welcome to this week's newscast. I'm your host, Diana Longry. Thank you for tuning in. To help me with this week's news is my co-anchor, Mr. Kevin Berglund. Thank you, Mr. Berglund, for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Now, this week, we are going to continue our report on our trip to Richmond, Virginia, and some of the follow-up of the politicians who also went on that trip. Of course, keep in mind, they went on their junket, 35 members on their junket. You might be wondering, well, what is the bus rapid transit in Richmond, Virginia? And what is all the hullabaloo about? And how similar is the bus rapid transit in Richmond, Virginia to that that's being proposed between St. Paul and White Bear Lake using, for the most part, the Bruce Vento Trail, which will then be decimated. Mr. Berglund.
There's no way Ramsey County commissioners, including Vicki Reinhardt, the Maplewood, East Side of St. Paul, or McDonough, Commissioner McDonough, are going to open up the curtains and allow the public to see what's going on. And they're very pig-headed about that. Going down to Richmond, they did not even have a packet to pick up or an agenda to pick up for anyone to actually follow them to find out what's actually going on. Of course, we went down there. We went down there to see what the kind of information they got, what the similarities were, but we also were hoping to pick the brains of some of the officials down there to see what their thought process and their planning process was, and just to see how actually similar the Ramsey County rush line, which is going over an established environmental trail out between houses in Maplewood and in White Bear Lake, one of the biggest amenities in those cities, versus the Richmond Pulse, which is going down the main street in Richmond, Virginia. A city bigger, I think, than St. Paul.
and I'm glad that you brought up that we wanted to talk to some of the officials out there to also get their information that they had on the process that they went through to construct the Pulse. And we did have that opportunity to talk with one of the project managers, and he was gracious enough to speak with us and meet with us in his office for an hour. But one of the key takeaways that I took from our interview with him is the Pulse, or their bus rapid transit, was put on Broad Street to alleviate a problem. And he was able to identify what that problem was. The problem that they had on Broad Street was that the bus traffic on Broad Street was causing the congestion on Broad Street. And he had a depiction of the concentration of the congestion on Broad Street and where the heaviest level of ridership was based on their bus usage up and down Broad Street, and that putting the bus rapid transit in place was to help to even that out and to even out the congestion. Now, whether or not if it actually did or not, I can't tell you that, because he didn't have a follow-up spreadsheet to show what the change in the congestion is now that the bus rapid transit is in place. But he certainly had his chart that he could show where it was before the BRT was put in place. Of course, ironically, much of that congestion was all along that portion of Broad Street, which is flanked by a very large Virginia Commonwealth University and medical school. And so in his analysis and his discussion, he identified this as the problem that the BRT was going to solve. When we try and determine what is the problem that the rush line is going to solve, we come up empty-handed. We don't know what the problem is that the BRT here on the rush line is going to solve.
A dramatic difference. And it seems that the Ramsey County officials will, who are building the rush line, they want to quarrel with people or dismiss people who want to find out what is really up. If you ask them that directly, what is the problem they're trying to solve, they will, in some sort of a roundabout way, they kind of say, well, the main thing we're trying to do is have economic development.
Or that they're trying to use it as a tool of equity.
Yes.
So those are the two, you're right, those are, there's some economic tool of development, which of course, as you indicated, the Bruce Vento Trail is in the backyards of people's homes. There's not going to be economic development next to the playset. It just isn't going to work that way. And the other, as we will have a clip coming up here, is that it's somehow a tool of equity. Now, you talked about how they are dismissive of people when they ask for some question for information or, what is how did we get here? And we showed a clip previously from another meeting back in July where a resident of White Bear Lake asked that question and a similar question, and Commissioner Vicki Reinhardt just basically was like, ugh, we just don't have enough time to get into that.
Question.
If you want to sign up for the public comment period, if you could come up at that point.
It's not a comment, it's a question.
Yeah, go ahead, please.
Well, you're not running this meeting, Kevin.
Yeah.
Pardon me, Mr. Chair, where do you sign up? I don't even see the sign up.
Sign up sheet on that table right here.
By the way, are you recording this meeting, Mr. Chair, or is this all off the record, kind of?
It's a public meeting.
It's a public meeting. But anyway, so anyway, yeah, we're going into the public comment. And so Mr. Nielsen, you signed up first, so if you, please, you want to come up front? So
How do we sign up, please? Are you the one who takes sign ups?
Yes, I'll take
No, you just fill out and give it up to her, up to the mayor.
And as you recall, it's a 3-minute limit, and is Maggie Youngberg?
Well, you heard my neighbours, so I don't need to answer that because I live
Okay, then
in
you got it.
Washington Avenue.
Okay.
But I do have a question. Why did you even choose that area? After hearing everything that's been said about it, the congestion, the number of the people, the no parking, so on and so on, why would you even consider that, that basically residential street? I live right on the corner, by the way, well, she's on the corner and then let's go to her. So, by the way, I also ride a bike, and there were days when it was quite impossible to get out, because we don't have pavements on 8th and 7th Street. Yeah, so because of cars parked and buses coming out, school buses and everybody else's car, you have to really be careful when you're nudging your bike out there. That's about it. I'm just amazed that you'd even consider that area.
Did you have the opportunity to go to any of the meetings we held in White Bear Lake?
No, I didn't.
Well,
But I'm hoping there'll be more,
there will.
because
There's one tonight. There's at Market Fest.
nobody will be there.
Have you answered your question?
Yeah, they never give explanations.
Why did you choose that area?
Sir, if you continue on, I'm going to ask you to leave. I think you're being very disruptive to this process, so I would appreciate your no comments. And yet, I see you recording it, so go for it. But,
Well, could I?
yeah,
maybe-
Rick, you were at most of these too.
Yes, I have been. And honestly, there has been hours and hours of meetings from different groups and pop-up meetings for the public and everything else. So there's been a lot of discussion that's gone into this, including going to each of the locations that you see up here, not just White Bear, but all of the locations have to go to the cities, Maplewood, the city of White Bear Lake, St. Paul, all of them. So this is, it may be, I'm sure that it is newer to you, but the fact is, each of these communities have vetted these things, and none of them have been easy. None of them have been easy. So if we could get some information, we can hook you up with some information about the results of all of those different meetings. So this was not a rash decision, and it has already gone through the city council.
No.
So you can get more information, but it's not an easy question to answer because you don't have all the information, and we can't possibly give it to you in 3 minutes. So,
Well, my question still stands.
and we can get answers for you from, if you want to go through all the information, you can certainly do that.
Do you remember that clip?
Absolutely. She always, in the response, refers people to the website as if the website there is something to be found. It is a boilerplate website with very little, check it out yourself, information available. In fact, almost all the meetings that are associated with the Rush Line, none of them are available in video form or audio form or minutes or agenda or anything. And yet she continues to dismiss people, telling them, as you have not done your homework and you have not gone to their website. Well, I can assure you, the one who is neglectful and not doing their duty of their homework would be Ramsey County Board Commissioner Vicki Reinhardt, and I don't think she's doing any service to the general public in the discussion of transportation infrastructure to dismiss people and lead people astray. Instead of being forthright and open, she is basically bullying people and accusing them of not being prepared to be at the table and ask a question. A tragedy. The other another big area of confusion, which Ramsey County is perpetuating, is when it comes to the piggy bank. How much is this big, hundreds of tons of concrete, how much, in building this, how much is this to require? Is it like in Richmond, Virginia, where buying all the buses, doing the infrastructure work, and that would mostly be building the shelters, the bus shelters, putting up some cameras in the shelters, putting up a button that will buzz if there's trouble, that you can talk to somebody. That whole affair cost $60 million. Now, going to some of the community councils in St. Paul, people believe that this bus rapid transit, they're thinking maybe it cost $10 million. Of course,
But that's what the people on the street think.
That's right.
But that's not in reality what it's going to cost, because you have gone to some of those meetings and the question was answered, and it was the first time you actually heard a very realistic number. And what was that number?
Well, they're saying 500 million. 500 million, that's $500 million. So one of their big things that these Ramsey County officials always push out to people who are inquiring is, not only is part of the equity is that Minneapolis and the West Metro always gets the big projects. They get this train, or they get the highways, or they consume all this transit money. And East Metro area does not get its share. So this is a way, they said, for East Metro elected officials to go in there and take some of this money to get their share. Now, the logic of that is first of all, it's an indictment of East Metro officials for not being at the table at the legislature and other places when they're passing out the money, but to not have a bigger vision, to not have some sort of actual plan and goal and something that's imaginative and actually realistic and practical for the East Metro. What they're doing is they're taking all this money, however much it's going to be, taxing Ramsey County officials, taking money from the federal government, taking money from the state, and putting it in something that's a failure. What a waste of opportunity cost. And that's the real tragedy. Why aren't they putting it in something that is going to bring more residents economic opportunity over here instead of a false hope, pie in the sky dreams, which is destined to fail?
And you have pointed out certainly a great indictment of them. To me, from that, there comes an even greater indictment in that they have allowed Ramsey County, the East Side, and Maplewood, the economy to lag and to flounder and not to prosper, so that we don't attract successful transit projects. Because as you said, they're just taking this transit project so they can say they built it, that they got the money. But they're not saying we're going to have a successful project. While they put that label on it, oh, it'll be so wonderful. But on the other hand, there's statistics for their existing bus route that parallels it, doesn't substantiate that the need is even there to put in a BRT, because they can't even keep the express bus full. If you can't keep your express bus full, how is a super duper express bus with fancy stations going to be more successful, more attractive? You only have so many riders. They only have so many jobs to go to. They only can make so many connections.
And when you look at, if the elected officials, public officials, government officials, longtime officials like Congresswoman Betty McCollum, over 20 years, Commissioner Vicki Reinhardt, I think she's over 20 years, and of course Betty McCollum, that's as a member of Congress, and she was in the state legislature too. I don't know what.
And don't forget Nora Slawick, okay?
Nora Slawick.
Because she has been like transit queen for over 20 years.
Right.
And she has had her fingers in every single legislative pot there has been for over 20 years, and is indeed now, whereas before she was informally the transit queen, now she formally is the transit queen, being ahead of the Metropolitan Council. So
Right.
This also is right at her feet as well.
Nora Slawick, 15 years in the state legislature, 4 years as the mayor of Maplewood, all of this focusing as her major focus on transportation, now being appointed by political appointment by the governor to be head of the Met Council, whose one of their largest responsibilities is transit. To see what has occurred of this little posse or regime on the East Metro, their lack of, I don't know if it's just complete lack of leadership, but there's certainly been in my mind, lacking leadership ability from Betty McCollum, Vicki Reinhardt, Nora Slawick, and others. There's a whole cadre of them. If it's lack of ambition, they really had no ambition to have any kind of vision. Or if it's just a lack of hustles, they just are low energy. They don't have the energy, but they have failed the East Metro. And to go and get federal money and dump it down the drain is not a good use of government money, taxpayers' money, but it's a failure of what is the future of the East Side, not to have a vision.
And but they have a vision. This is their vision, okay? Their vision is that the transportation will produce transit-oriented development, because that is what you hear them say over and over again.
Is that like T-O-D, toad?
As opposed to DOA, dead on arrival. But they see it that you have to put in the transit first, and then from that transit, you will then have economic development. Well, in some communities, that may be true if you have the right ingredients. But in this case, where the Bruce Vento Trail is, in residential, single-family neighborhoods, that's not going to happen. And with the new changes of their vision for Maplewood Mall, going from commercial and the possibility of jobs and distribution centers that could potentially go in there, and saying it's only going to be a bedroom community of housing, well, where are the jobs going to be? Where is that transit-oriented development other than that you just built a lot of housing along the route someplace? That doesn't produce good-paying, sustainable jobs for the people living in that housing. And see, that's where their vision breaks down.
Talking about the piggy bank and the minimal cost of this, because if they're saying 500 million, you know that they never get those figures right. And it's certainly not going to be less than 500 million. As you look at any transit line, anywhere in Minnesota, they never are under budget, is always over budget. So I think
and we heard Victoria Reinhardt say in the clips that we showed last week's news program that, you know, the Richmond, Virginia BRT uses buses that have only 2 doors. And that here in Ramsey County, they are thinking of getting buses with 3 doors. Well, we were told what the cost of those buses were in Richmond, Virginia. And so we would estimate that if you went and you bought buses with 3 doors rather than 2 doors, that those buses are going to be even more expensive.
right, and each of those buses, the 10 of them they bought for the Pulse, and they don't run them every 10 minutes. Ramsey County on this backyard bedroom community is going to run them every 10 minutes as an aside. They used buses that ran on natural gas, the cheapest type of fuel. In Minnesota, Ramsey County is proposing, and who knows if this is pie in the sky thinking, but they're pitching it as the real deal. They're going to use electric buses. Now you can imagine that electric buses are going to be significantly more expensive, just like electric cars are.
But tell our viewers how much the buses were in Richmond, Virginia.
Well, they're $500,000 a piece, 500,000.
Okay, so and they bought 10. So that gives you an idea that if you look at the cost of the buses and the cost of their total project, you can figure out exactly what percentage the costs of the project were actually the buses. Here in Ramsey County, if they're going to be switching instead to electric buses with 3 doors and who knows what other bells and whistles, they're going to be more than the cost of the buses in Richmond, Virginia.
What's interesting is to pick this apart a little bit. You go down to Richmond, Virginia for a couple days, and you're deluged with information on the particulars. You ask Ramsey County for months and years, what is any of this going to cost? What is the cost of bus? They have yet to mention it. This is the South. I thought the South, Richmond, Virginia, they were supposed to be tight with their information, non-transparent. And Minnesota, which they keep telling us it's good government, they have those curtains pulled so tight and will not release information. You would have to take and you would have to get a whole crew to force them to squeeze a drop of information. That's why if Vicki Reinhardt and her crew could just have a little transparency. We know we're not going to get real transparent, but just please, a little.
Well, let me give our viewers, give them a perspective on how gracious the officials were there in Richmond, Virginia. They didn't know us. They didn't know that we were coming. We just went because we're reporters. We're, tagging along after the Minnesota group that are on their junket to see the BRT. And so we went to the main headquarters where the transit authority is run out of. All the buses, the BRT, all their transit is run out of this one large facility. And it is a gated facility. It has, you have to buzz in order to get past the gates to go to the building. So we went to the gate and buzzed in and found out that, well, unfortunately, we were at the gate that was for deliveries, like, say, the supply company of office supplies. And the security guard said, oh, sorry, after I introduced myself and why we were there, she says, whoops, sorry, you're at the wrong gate. Just do a U-turn, go around the block a little further, you'll see another entrance and go in that gate instead. So I thought, okay, let's do that. So I did that, went to the other gate, buzzed in, said, hi, I'm the same person, here I am, and gave my purpose again, and she says, okay, sure, no problem. Gate goes open, we drive on through, find a spot in the parking lot and park. So then we walk in, go to the information desk, and the lady says, oh, who are you here to see? We said, well, we don't know who we are here to see, but this is why we're here and this is what we're doing. And she says, oh, okay, well, let me make a couple of calls for you. And so she got on the phone, made a few calls, talked to a few people. Finally, one of them because a couple of them were gone because they were busy with the people from Minnesota, with their giving their presentations. And so finally there was somebody who was at their desk and they said, sure, I'll be right on down. It turned out it was the project manager of the BRT, the Pulse. And so that is, how we were able to secure our interview. And he was very gracious. He came on down. We were talking in the lobby for a while. And then he says, well, come on up to my office. Let's sit down. And we sat down with him for an hour. And that is a much different response than, as Mr. Berglund indicated, that the officials give to the general population in Minnesota here in the metro where we've had our experiences.
In fact, if you go to the Maplewood Council, the Maplewood Council's mayor, Mary Abrams. Mary Abrams is the appointed mayor of Maplewood, of the 5-member board. If you go up and you actually try to find some information at a council meeting under a public hearing, an official public hearing of something the city council is taking action on, if she doesn't like the question, she will try to pick a quarrel. She will interrupt, she will disrupt, and she will do everything to try to fight people. And the question is, and it becomes very significant, your antennas go way up. What, Mary Abrams, mayor of Maplewood, appointed mayor of Maplewood, what are you trying to hide? Why are you picking a quarrel with somebody who's just only allowed to get up at 3 minutes? Why are you trying to disrupt the situation in any way possible? Can't you even listen for 3 minutes? Even if you're not listening, like Nora Solwick used to do, she used to be gracious enough and respectful enough, in most cases, to sit back, probably close her ears. I don't hear you, I don't hear you. But she was not up there to quarrel.
Well, now for our viewers who may have just been tuning into this report, on the Rush Line BRT and the comparison of that to the BRT Pulse in Richmond, Virginia, and the junket that 35 individuals went on at, they all had stipends, I believe, to pay for their travel and accommodations and meals. If you're just tuning into this report, you may not have seen what the Skyline and the BRT route looks like in Richmond, Virginia. So let's take a quick look at that so you can get a bird's eye view of what we saw. Now this, of course, is from 13 or so stories up in the air. It is from the top of City Hall. City Hall, Richmond, Virginia City Hall is right on Broad Street, and that street you see there is Broad Street. There's another view of it from another window. That's Broad Street, and that is the route that the Pulse BRT runs up and down. And you can see the skyline, that there's a lot of commercial property, there are apartments, there's parking lots. It looks much like downtown St. Paul and University Avenue.
And there's a tree every now and then.
Yes, there's another viewpoint there. And this a floor that is on top of City Hall, you can actually walk around the whole entire perimeter of it and see the entire skyline of Richmond, Virginia. So you can see it's nothing like the Bruce Vento Trail. It's nothing like Maplewood. It's nothing like White Bear Lake.
And another point about City Hall, even though this is a city similar size as St. Paul, and it's kind of, when you go into City Hall there, they're not scanning you, trying to pretend that you're up to, you need to go through you're not required to go through any metal detectors. It's basically an open City Hall. This is on the East Coast in Virginia, Richmond, Virginia, the capital of Virginia. It's completely different from what is going on in St. Paul. I'm still puzzled why, going down to your local City Hall in St. Paul, everybody's required to go through metal detectors. This is
because they're all upset about the garbage issue. Now you'll see in this view here, you'll see up by that one big building there, we zoomed in, there's the bus, the Pulse.
That's one of their $500,000 buses.
The BRT, yeah. You just saw $500,000 right there.
And Richmond, Virginia owns 10 of those.
Yes.
For their...
And I believe that they go every 15 minutes up until about 10 o'clock at night or so. On Fridays and Saturdays, it's a little bit different. Once they hit that magical time when they're no longer every 15 minutes, then they run every half hour. So you have to know that. Also on these stations, these elevated platform stations, there's the equipment so you can buy your ticket in advance of the bus coming to the platform. There's also equipment that you can, if you have the right app on your phone, that you can determine exactly where along the route the bus is and how long it's going to be until the next bus shows up, next BRT shows up.
All this stuff has all been invented, all been used before, is off-the-shelf stuff.
Right.
It's not like Ramsey County is going to have any new ingenuity for their little stations.
Yes.
Or their shelters or pickup spots.
And then next we have our composite view of what the route itself looks like, so that you could be there as if you were there. We were in our car following the Pulse and identifying the lanes and the stations so that way you can see how it is set up. Let's take a look. And here we are on Broad Street. You can see that it's just normal lanes with a lane identified as bus only. There are certain areas of Broad Street where, as you can see here, that bus lane actually moves towards the middle median, and that's where the bus travels. In those sections of Broad Street, the station with the raised platform is actually in the middle of the street in the median. And that will come up in our film footage here to one of those, and you'll see what I mean. And then there are other places on Broad Street where then the bus has to then, there's a station right there, you can see it.
This isn't a new road. This is the same path that's been used for decades and decades and decades, and right downtown, it's been used probably since Thomas Jefferson put the state capitol, built the architect of the Virginia state capitol. It's, they're not plowing any new roadway. You can see that there's buildings on both sides that have been there for years and years and years.
Right.
It's just painting the different types of lines down the center of the street.
Yes, and here we come to, there's the Pulse that we are passing. You'll notice that the Pulse did have to stop. We were not in a lane to stop, so we got to continue to go. And another thing I want to mention, we do not have any film footage of the inside of the Pulse bus, but it is just a standard bus inside. There are not padded seats. There's no really other features other than Wi-Fi in it that would make it to be any more comfy than any other bus. Very, very utilitarian.
Utilitarian, and it's just as if it's a basic city bus, kind of the economy model. There is nothing special about it. The only difference is, of course, of a regular bus is their raised platforms, which does, okay, well, that's what they do in, that's nothing new, is that? To build your platform up a couple of feet so you can walk on without taking a step?
Right. Well, now you've got the picture of what the trip was like, looking at the route, looking at it from the bird's eye view, looking at it from the street level. Last week we covered after the junket comments of the commissioners who went on the junket and how they were describing what they saw, so you got to hear and compare their reality with reality. And we started to review the film footage of appointed Mayor Marley Abrams of Maplewood, who also got to go on this junket. We started with the film footage of her summary and description of this trip to the Maplewood residents at the most recent Maplewood City Council meeting. So we're going to go back to those clips and review a couple that we saw last week, but then continue with the rest of her comments. So now that you've again seen the bird's eye view, you've seen it from the street level, you've gotten some context, you can judge whether or not you think that the appointed mayor of Maplewood, Marley Abrams, is either smoking something or just totally disingenuous.
To share with council members, if you remember, you approved my attendance and also Public Works Director Steve Love's attendance in Richmond, Virginia, to go to a transportation conference. Richmond, Virginia has a BRT line, a bus rapid transit line, that they call the Pulse. We are looking at Maplewood in the next few years First with our Gold Line, and Councilmember Smith is a representative on the Gold Line, and then the Rush Line going through the north side of Maplewood from actually connecting St. Paul up to White Bear. And I have to say that it was an extraordinary opportunity to go and see a BRT line and to see how they operate and talk to the city representatives, talk with the mayor. We actually had lunch with the mayor of Richmond and talked with some of the issues that they had. But I have to say that it was, there's nothing like actually seeing it and being.
I don't believe that she has ever ridden a bus before. Because certainly riding the Pulse, which we did, by the way, we did ride the Pulse, and we stopped at many stations, we got off at stations, we got off at some of the ones that were in the median to see how easy or difficult it might be to go from one to then the other, going in the opposite direction to see whether or not, if we were handicapped people in wheelchairs, whether or not we would be able easily to get from one station in a median, get to the other one that's going in the opposite direction. Let's say if you have to make a connection to go somewhere else. So we did ride that bus, and I'll tell you, Mr. Berglund, I've been on a lot of buses. I've been on city buses, Greyhound buses, tour buses, school buses. I think I've even been on one of those little handicap buses for people who can call in advance, Metro Mobility. I've been on those buses. And I have to say that the Pulse bus was just a bus. And yet she believes this was so tremendous that she went all that way to ride a bus.
And on the bus, they didn't have a refreshment counter or a pop machine, or you weren't able to buy hard-boiled eggs. I'm not sure if she understands what a bus is there.
Well, and
but she was excited about it.
She was, and she said that she was glad she went to hear what the problems were that they encountered. And yet, as part of her report, wouldn't it have been informative to at least identify what top 3 issues they had that she was most struck by that were most applicable to our community, that is information she brought back home?
Wow, that would have been deep. That would, and she's the skilled litigator who is on a daily basis picking things apart, isn't she? Isn't that what skilled attorney litigators, when they're in court, do, is to sleuth out the truth, find discernment on what are the important issues, relay that to the jury or to the judge so they can have an understanding of the case? As skilled litigator for 25 years, and this is what you get from the mayor of Maplewood. We had lunch with the mayor, and I was really excited about that too. I'm a mayor, he's a mayor, we're all mayors.
Yes, and you know, she makes it even bigger, because you see, this was just simply a junket. Now, she describes it to the Maplewood residents as a way to subtly justify her going on this junket. She's now going to call it a transportation conference. Let's take a look.
7 miles long, whereas our BRT line, I know the Rush line is going to be 14 miles. Councilmember Smith, how long is the Gold line? Do you know? 11 miles connecting St. Paul out to Woodbury, going through Maplewood. And so our lines are considerably longer, but to actually see one in operation, I was particularly interested in the level entrance into the buses so that there's no step up, which is great in terms of people who might have challenges with steps, that it's level boarding, and so it's really convenient and very fast. The interesting facts that I recalled about the experience was that it took 2 years to build, and the BRT line in Richmond has only been operating for a little over a year.
when we were in Richmond, Virginia, we didn't specifically take any film footage of the elevated platform and its distance of the platform to the street, or how the bus connects up to that platform to make it easy for getting on the bus or off the bus. So we apologize for that. However, we're going to rectify that. No, Mr. Berglund, we're not going to go back to Richmond, Virginia just to get a couple of film clips. Instead, we're going to go to Roseville, Snelling Avenue, where they have a BRT with elevated platforms, and we'll take a couple of film clips of that and we'll bring them back to you so you can see what she's talking about.
This great, like in Tony the Tiger, great innovations. Like, why didn't we think about this? Why didn't this come to our mind years ago?
Oh my gosh, it's amazing. And she had to go all the way to Richmond, Virginia to see this great invention. Wow. I'm sure she must drive by Snelling once in a while on her way to Minneapolis to court.
In the clip prior to this, she insinuated, I think, that the council approved her to go. They were, I mean, she's a part-time mayor. I'm not quite. No, I don't know what that means to approve to go. She didn't miss a council meeting. She just went out there. It's my belief the trip was not paid for by Maplewood, but even though that's what the implication is, I believe it was paid for by Ramsey County taxpayers or a grant that Ramsey County had. I'm not sure why she needed anybody's approval. I mean, when she took the office by appointment, I guess she needed the approval and consent of the council to be a part of that charade.
Well, and that's a good question because she does serve on that policy and advisory committee for the Rush Line. So as a committee member, she was already slated to go as a member of that committee. So why would she need city council approval?
And the only thing that I think might have been one of the reasons she presented it this way in this false matter is because they took the public works director of Maplewood and Maplewood paid his way, gave him paid time. In other words, he didn't take a vacation. He was paid his regular his salary to go out there.
Right, because he would have been there for the whole week that, Commissioner Ortega was out there.
And the question is whether Maplewood taxpayers paid for his meals, his lodging, his airfare, or whether that was Ramsey County.
Right.
And of course, the Public Works Director has a big enough project all his own with the roads, the state of roads, and the problems all around the public transportation, the regular transportation system in Maplewood. I'm not sure why the council didn't focus on keeping him working on his regular issues, but of course, like you said, it was a junket.
Yes.
So,
and certainly one of his regular issues in the course of his day-to-day work is that exit ramp of English and Highway 36 and figuring out how to correct that engineering debacle. But that may stay the way it is because until they get more money, how are they ever going to correct it?
because as you've seen, she said, you approved myself going and Steve Love. She did not say Steve Love, the Maplewood engineer and public works director. She just used his name informally.
Yes. Let's continue with our next clip.
Had anticipated about 3,500 riders per day, and in the first year, they have averaged 7,000 a day. And if I had any kind of comments, it would be that perhaps they didn't anticipate such large ridership because they only had 2 entrances into the buses. And I know in at least the Rush Line, they're talking about 3 entrances to make sure that that boarding really goes very effectively and efficiently.
Now, she said in the first day, right?
I thought, yes.
I think she said in the first day.
Is that like preview day?
Well,
Free preview day? Or?
here's what I have determined in my review and research into this. They projected how many riders they thought they were going to have. But then do you know what the Transit Administration did in Richmond, Virginia to roll out their BRT? They gave out free bus passes to everyone for a week. And so that's how they got people on the BRT, was making it free.
What, to see it, to see what it was all
And
about.
that's how they doubled the ridership. Now, of course, how that ridership continues to be maintained at higher levels is because all the students at the Virginia Commonwealth University and the big medical school, and they're in the fees and tuition of all the students going in to school at that complex. I think you found there was like 30,000 students enrolled at that
Right.
university complex, that as part of the fees they pay is a fee to the BRT.
Right.
And so they're automatically paying into that bus service. So here she is giving a false story, a false storyline without any details, facts, or context to make you think that we are going to be every bit as successful. Well, yes, if we suddenly have a university that we build that's going to have 30,000 students, miraculously, and if we give out free bus tickets to everybody, miraculously, we may have the same success. Well, let's continue with our film footage.
During the 2 years of construction and then the 1+ year that the BRT line in Richmond has been in operation, they have calculated that it has been approximately, it's brought about $900 million in development and redevelopment into that city. And you can just see it, it's alive. What was interesting, because we rode the BRT line so many times, I think we were on it maybe 5 or 6 times, going to different places and seeing how it all operated and connected the city. And I took the opportunity to talk to a number of people that were riding the BRT, and they had the same theme. And these were just, regular people that were going to work or doctor's appointments or whatever, that the majority of people that I spoke to didn't want the BRT. They didn't like it, but they ride it now every day, and they couldn't imagine their lives without it because they don't have to use their cars in the same way. And so
And yes, we did see a lot of construction, particularly on the campus. A lot of construction on the campus, but then again, those are state dollars invested into their university system. We saw also some other construction along the route, but we also saw large department store, big box stores that were empty. So you see, she's not very clear on what development she's talking about. Now, next we have a clip where we're going to show where Steve Love has some comments he's going to make. And of course, he always makes the comment about the equity argument, about how that really solidified for him the equity piece.
there were representatives there from Ramsey County and St. Paul and Vadnais Heights and White Bear and, of course, Maplewood. Public Works Director Love, would you like to add anything about the conference?
Mayor and Council, I think one of the things that really struck me was what access to this type of transportation brings to a city and its residents in terms of equity, access to jobs, access to good health care, access to quality food. So I think the equity piece really hit home with me.
Love. Mr. Berglund, we've come to the end of our program. We're going to have more on this report next week. So stay tuned, and thank you for tuning in. Mr. Berglund, any last comments before we sign off?
Thanks for having me. We know that the one in Ramsey County is even going to be a bigger, more ridership than the one down Main Street in Richmond, the one through the bedroom community in the backyards. I'm surprised they're going to only need 3 doors. I think they would probably need 4 or 5 doors because so many people are going to be packing in.
Well, we have another meeting that we're going to be attending where they're going to talk some more about their takeaways from their Richmond, Virginia junket. We'll have film footage for that, and so you won't want to miss it. Bye-bye.
I believe we will move on to the mayoral vacancy. So for this process, we will begin by accepting nominations from the council. We'll have a discussion, meaning each person who's interested in being mayor will give some comments, a time for question and answer, and then we'll move on to making a decision. Fair enough? Excellent. Do we have a preference on, well, first we'll need to make nominations. And it is okay to nominate ourselves.
I verified that. I'm going to nominate myself for the appointment of mayor.
Excellent. And seconds are not needed here. And I will nominate myself for the appointment of mayor.
Thanks, guys.
You want to make it 3 of a kind?
No.
All right.
Absolutely not.
Excellent.
Now I have to look at the attorney. What do we do next?
Whatever you like.
Well, we had 2 nominations, so, and I'm not the chair here, so how do we handle this, sir?
Yeah, so we,
Why don't we ask
Do you
Mr.
have-
Beatty?
Well, I think unless there's more discussion, it's time to vote.
now the question is how we want to handle voting. I think we should all 3 vote. If you are statutorily precluded for voting from yourself, you may want to consider another vote. So if we vote for each other, that cancels it out.
Right.
The only issue.
Right, it is. It
Yeah.
is.
Let's do it this way. Let's go this way. If Mary Lee abstains, I'll abstain. If Mary Lee votes for me, I'll vote for Mary Lee.
Okay.
Brian, I'll vote for you.
Mary Lee, I'd be happy to vote for you.
Okay. Kathleen?
It's gonna,
You know, why do I sit with these people? Can anybody tell me? I vote for Mary Lee.
Excellent.
Okay.
Thank you, Kathy. And we are not elected to make easy decisions. So,
Well, you think I'd know that by now, wouldn't you?
yeah. Congratulations, Mary Lee.